Stop for a moment and look at the way you water your garden. You baby the beds, you soak the top until it turns dark, you feel like you did your job. Then you come back the next day and it looks dry again, like the water never existed. You know this feeling. You miss one hot afternoon and your plants punish you. Leaves droop, flowers fall, fruit cracks. Suddenly you are carrying guilt and a watering can like it is your second job. And after months of effort, the season ends and you are left with tired soil and a pile of dead plants. This is not a calm garden. This is a daily dependency. It is almost like a subscription model. You do not just plant. You sign up for chores. You sign up for stress. You sign up for standing outside, pouring water on the same patch of dirt, hoping the roots got some of it before the sun stole it. But what if I told you the most productive gardens in the ancient world were not built like this at all? Roman gardeners did use water, but they did not water like we do. They did not stand there every evening splashing the surface and calling it care. They moved water once, they guided it, they hid it where it mattered, and then they let the garden drink on its own terms. That is why people say they never watered. What they really mean is, they did not water by hand the way we picture it. The water was built into the garden, like the garden had its own quiet plumbing. To understand why Romans could grow so much with less daily watering, you do not need a big history lecture. You just need to understand one simple truth. Plants do not drink from the top of the soil. Roots drink from where the moisture stays, and the top layer dries the fastest because it is exposed to sun and wind. So when you water the top, you are doing the least efficient version of watering. You are feeding the air first. You are paying the evaporation tax. That is why you feel trapped, because the surface is a liar. It looks dry even when deeper soil is still damp, or it looks wet for a moment, even though the root zone stayed thirsty. The top gives you drama, not truth. Now, let's do the simplest math in the world. If you water every day for 90 days, that is 90 times you had to show up, 90 chances to forget, 90 chances to travel, 90 chances to lose a plant because life got busy. Romans aimed for a different system, not perfect, not magical, just smarter. They wanted water to be steady, not splashy. They wanted it to last, not flash. So they used gravity like a helper. In many Roman homes, gardens were not just beds in dirt, they were planned spaces, courtyards with paths, pots and tubs, beds edged with stone, and very often water had a place to travel, like a small channel or a basin near the planting area. That sounds fancy, but the idea is simple. If water can run along the edge of a bed, it can seep into the soil from the side. If a basin holds water near the plants, the soil can drink slowly instead of getting blasted from above. If a fountain keeps water moving into a catch area, the garden has a steady supply without you standing there. And here is what that changes inside the soil. When water comes from below or from the side, roots go looking for it. They grow down. They grow deeper. They anchor. They stop living like a shallow puddle plant. A deep-rooted plant is a calm plant. It does not faint the moment the surface dries. It does not need you every day. It can handle a hot afternoon because its real drink is not sitting on top where the sun can steal it. This is why the Roman approach feels so different. It is not about pampering, it is about training. Most modern watering teaches roots to stay lazy and shallow. It is like feeding a kid candy right at the table, then wondering why they never learned to cook. If the water is always on top, roots never learn to go down. Now, the second part of the Roman system is what most people ignore, and it is almost too boring to sound powerful. They protected the soil surface. Bare soil is like bare skin in summer. It heats up fast. It cracks. It loses moisture. It turns hard. And once the top is hot and dry, it becomes a pump that pulls water up from below, just to evaporate it into the air. So if you keep the surface covered, you slow that loss. The soil stays cooler, moisture stays longer, and the root zone stays stable. This is where the big harvest feeling comes from. Not one giant secret. A stack of small choices that make the garden steady. Steady water, cooler soil, deeper roots, less stress, more growth. Now ask yourself a painful question. If this is so simple, why do most people not garden this way today? Because steady does not sell. A hose and a sprinkler feel modern. They feel like you are doing something. Wet soil looks like proof. And a whole industry grew up around selling you tools, timers, and fixes that keep you stuck in the daily cycle. A garden that waters itself is bad for business. A garden that makes you anxious is very profitable. But Romans had one more advantage that most people overlook. They had clay everywhere. Clay pipes, clay tiles, clay jars, clay storage. Clay was not a craft item to them. It was a normal home material. And there is a way to use plain, unglazed clay in a garden that turns watering into a simple refill instead of a daily surface soak. It is quiet. It is cheap. It is almost invisible once it is in the ground. And it works in a way that feels like the soil is asking for water only when it needs it. Most people have never even heard of it, or they heard a rumor and thought it was a gimmick. But this is the part that makes the Roman story click, because it takes everything we just talked about and turns it into one simple home setup. And once you see how it works, you will understand why the real Roman watering trick was not the fountain and not the channel. It was the clay jar they buried under the soil. The reason most people think the buried watering trick does not work is simple. They try it once, they do it the lazy way, and the pot turns into a tiny underground bird bath that dries out in a day. Then the plants still droop, and the person says, "See, it's a gimmick." The first failure is the pot choice. If the pot is glazed or painted, the soil cannot drink through it. Water stays trapped inside like a sealed bottle. From the outside, nothing changes. You might as well bury a mug. The second failure is the bottom hole. Most terracotta pots have a drain hole, so water falls out fast. People bury it, fill it, and by lunchtime it is empty. That is not slow watering. That is a leak. The third failure is leaving the mouth open. Sun pulls water out. Bugs find it. Sometimes it even turns green inside. So the person spends more time dealing with the pot than they would have spent watering, and they quit. So if you want this to work the way people claim, you do not start with enthusiasm. You start with a clean setup that removes the 3 failure points. You want a plain, unglazed terracotta pot. Rough to the touch, no shine, no coating. If you rub it with a wet finger, it darkens and then lightens again as it dries. That is what you want. That is the pot that can breathe. Then you make sure the water does not escape from the bottom. If there is a hole, you plug it. It does not have to be fancy. A rubber stopper works. Waterproof putty works. Even a tight cork can work. The goal is simple. The pot must hold water, so the only way water leaves is through the clay walls, slowly. Now burying it matters. If you bury it too shallow, it feeds the hottest, driest layer and loses water faster. If you bury it too deep, young roots will not reach it for a while. A good rule is to bury it so the shoulder of the pot is underground and only the opening is above the soil, like a little well. This is where people make the next mistake. They bury it in the corner and plant far away, like the pot is a decoration. It is not. This method works in a zone. It waters the soil around it, not the whole bed like a sprinkler. So you plant around it. Think of a small circle of plants, like the pot is the center of a wheel. A few tomatoes, peppers, herbs, beans, cucumbers, or flowers, depending on your space. In a bigger bed, you use more than one pot, spaced out. So each pot has its own little circle to feed. Before you fill it for the first time, do one small step that feels silly but changes everything. Soak the pot in water for a few hours. A dry clay pot can drink the first fill like a sponge. If you skip this, your first refill disappears faster, and you think the method is failing. If you pre-soak it, the pot is already satisfied, and the water it holds becomes a true reserve for the soil. Now fill it and cover the opening. Covering is not optional. It is part of the system. If you leave the top open, you are basically giving the sun a direct exit for your water. A simple saucer works. A flat stone works. A small tile works. Anything that blocks sun and keeps bugs out. Then comes the part that messes with your head. The soil surface can look dry. That is the point. You have to break the habit of judging your garden by what the top looks like. This system is meant to keep moisture down where the roots live, while the surface stays drier and calmer. If you want a proof moment that feels real, do this. The day after you set it up, push your finger into the soil 2 or 3 inches down, right next to the pot. Then do the same distance away, where the pot's zone does not reach. You will feel a difference. Near the pot, it is cooler and softer. Away from it, it is warmer and dustier. Same bed, same sun, 2 different worlds. Here is another proof moment that feels even more obvious. Put a simple mulch layer on the bed, not thick, just enough to shade the soil. Then watch what happens over the next week. The pot becomes a steady drip from inside the soil. The mulch becomes a shield on top. Together, they stretch your water so far that you stop thinking in days and start thinking in stretches. Now let's talk about why this creates bigger harvests in plain language. A plant that swings between soaked and bone-dry wastes energy. It closes and opens its tiny leaf pores like a stressed person holding their breath. It drops flowers when it panics. It makes bitter fruit when it struggles. A plant that gets steady moisture at the roots grows like it trusts the ground. It keeps making leaves. It keeps pushing new growth. It holds on to blossoms instead of throwing them away. That is how you get more food without doing more work. And because you are not splashing water across the bed all the time, you also stop creating a wet surface that wakes up every tiny weed seed. Weeds can still happen, of course, but many of the little fast weeds love wet topsoil. When the top stays drier, they often lose that easy advantage. There is one more thing most people do not expect, and it is a quiet win. When you water from above, you often hit leaves and stems by accident. When you deliver water underground, you keep leaves drier. That can reduce some problems that show up when plants stay damp on the outside, especially in warm, sticky weather. Now let's be honest about the one downside people should know. Over a long time, minerals can build up in the soil right around where the pot leaks. It depends on your water. It depends on your soil. The easy fix is simple. Every so often, give the bed a normal deep soak to rinse the area, or move the pot spot each season if you are using small beds. This keeps the system healthy. So why did this vanish from normal garden talk? Because it is not a product ladder. You do not need upgrades. You do not need attachments. You do not need a new version next year. It is one simple object that works quietly. It solves the problem and then disappears into the soil, which is the worst kind of solution if you are trying to sell excitement. But there is still a reason people fail, even after they pick the right pot, plug the hole, and cover the top. They expect it to work like a hose on day one. And that is the final trap. New plants with tiny roots cannot drink from a water source they have not reached yet. If you plant small seedlings and then stop all other watering, the seedlings can still suffer while they are trying to find the moist zone. This is where the method becomes powerful or pointless, depending on one simple habit. And in the next part, I am going to show you exactly how to bridge that early stage, so your plants lock onto the underground water like a magnet, and you finally get the "I barely water anymore" result people brag about. Here is the handoff that makes this work with real plants, not just as a cool idea. When you first plant a seedling, its roots are tiny. They have not reached far. So if you stop all other watering on day one, the plant can still droop and you will blame the buried pot. Instead, you do a short handoff. On planting day, give the seedling a normal drink right at the base, not a flood. Just enough to settle the soil and remove air gaps. Then fill the buried pot and cover it. Now, for the next few days, you water in a ring, not at the stem. Picture a small circle around the plant, like a moat. The ring starts close, then it slowly moves outward. Day 2, water a small ring a few inches away from the stem. Day 3, push that ring farther. Day 4, push it farther again, closer to the buried pot's zone. You are not just watering, you are teaching. Roots follow moisture. If moisture stays right at the stem, roots stay tight and shallow. If moisture is slightly away, roots stretch outward and downward. By the end of the first week, you stop watering the stem area. You refill the buried pot, you keep the top covered, and you let the plant lock onto that steady source. This is the moment the garden changes. You will notice it first on a hot day. The plant will not collapse at midday like it used to. New growth will look smoother. Flowers will hold instead of dropping. The plant will act like it trusts the ground. Once that happens, your job becomes simple. You do not chase the bed. You check the pot. When the level is low, you refill. When it is not, you leave it alone. Now add one small move that costs nothing and makes the whole system stronger. Shape the soil around your plant into a shallow bowl, not a flat plate. Just a gentle dip that catches water. If it rains, that bowl holds the rain long enough to soak down. If you do a quick ring watering during the handoff week, the bowl keeps it from running away. This is old garden thinking. Stop fighting water. Catch it, hold it, guide it. Now here is the part that makes the title feel true without any tricks. When you stop watering the surface every day, the surface starts to dry out more often. And that sounds bad until you realize what it does. It stops training weeds. Many of the fast little weeds that explode after a watering love wet topsoil. When the top is not constantly wet, they lose their favorite condition. Weeds can still happen, but you stop giving them a free invitation. And because you are not spraying water across the bed, you also stop splashing dirt onto leaves. That matters because a lot of plant trouble begins when wet soil gets kicked up onto stems and foliage. You are not making a mess and then wondering why the plant looks sick. So what does this do to harvests? It reduces the drama. Plants do not like wild swings. They do not like drowning, then drying, then drowning again. When moisture stays steadier down where roots live, the plant spends less time surviving and more time producing. That is the quiet path to more food. Now let's address the one thing people always say next. Did Romans really do this exact buried pot method? Here is the honest answer. The exact label is not the point. The point is the logic. Roman gardens were built around steady water and simple materials that lasted. They used clay everywhere in daily life. They guided water instead of wasting it. They cared about systems, not chores. That is what you are copying. And that is why this feels like forbidden knowledge, because it is not new. It is not flashy. It is not something you can keep selling in a bottle. It is a small design choice that takes work off your shoulders. So when you hear Roman gardeners never watered, what it really means is this. They were not chained to the daily surface splash. They set up the garden so water lived in the right place, and the plant could reach it without begging. Try it once in a small bed or a big container. Do the handoff week the way I explained. Then watch how quickly your garden stops acting needy. If you want more forgotten home garden tricks like this, subscribe, and tell me what you grow where the sun hits hardest in your space.